introduction, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really glad to be here. As Cameron mentioned, I am a former Pierce College student. You know, at the time that I came here, I never thought that I'd be coming back like 9 years after I graduated to give a speech or anything. So I'm really glad to be here. This conversation today is called Overcoming Difficult Beginnings and Finishing Strong. And I'm one of the type of presenters that likes it a little bit of back and forth. I like questions and interaction rather than just me standing up here talking the whole time. So if you have questions or anything, go ahead and ask me. But if we start getting too much, then I'll know when to cut that off. So don't feel shy or anything to ask a question. I'm going to start off pretty much by just sharing my story with you guys, let you guys know who I am. So I am a 34-year-old, turning 35 later this month, father of 6, and I live in Spanaway, Washington. The reason I put that on here is because my identity as a father is pretty much the most important aspect of my identity, in my opinion. There's a lot of things that make up who I am, but to me, that's the most important one. So I got pictures here with some of my kids and everything. But, I'm a lot more than that. Some people call me a community leader because I get out here and I advocate for certain issues. I organize, bring people to the table so that their voices can be heard. And, I'm out here doing a lot of different events and things like that. Advocating in Olympia, Washington, D.C. I'm pretty much somebody who came from nothing, found a passion, and I'm pursuing it. So I'm going to go ahead and start out by sharing my story with you guys. I'm going to talk about coming from a disadvantaged background to how I got to where I am today. So I was born March 23rd, 1985. My family lived in the Central District of Seattle at the time, which is a predominantly black neighborhood back then. I would say it's no longer a predominantly black neighborhood, but back then when I was born, it was a predominantly black neighborhood. And in the mid-'80s, there was something that kind of wreaked havoc through black communities. Does anyone have any idea what that might be? Crack cocaine. So what started as a strong 2-parent household, my mom's working, my dad's working, we got food on the table, we got clothes on our back, everything's good, at the time that I was born. Within like 5 years of my birth, all of that had been destroyed. So there have been a lot of issues that entered their relationship, and it all sparked from the drug use. And this wasn't something that just impacted my household, it was the whole community. My aunts, my uncles, pretty much most of the people who hung with my parents, they all fell victim to the same types of things, which was crack cocaine addiction and everything that comes along with that. So by the time I'm turning 5 years old, my parents are getting divorced. And when my parents got divorced, my dad decided that he was going to be a transient, which meant he didn't have a place to live, he was homeless, he wasn't going to work, he didn't believe in paying child support, thought it would make him like a slave to the system and things like that. He had a lot of kids. So he made the conscious decision to, I'm done working, I'm done pretty much participating in this society the way normal people do. And at the same time that he made that decision, he still didn't give up on being a father to his kids. So it put him in a tough position where he can't be a provider, he can't really be the best positive influence for his kids, but he still wanted to be in our lives, right? So sometimes we lived with our mom when they got divorced, but sometimes we'd end up with our dad. Sometimes with permission and sometimes without permission. So we'd move to Portland, Oregon with our mom. Sometimes our dad would take us, bring us back to Seattle. And one of the ways that we would have to get by and survive is by like walking the streets and panhandling, asking people, do you have any spare change? Just that we can get food or bus fare, whatever else we might need. And my dad's Old English, of course, which is the beer that he drank. But, we were out here in the streets doing things that no child should ever be doing, things that no child should ever be exposed to. Sometimes we'd go into like pizza restaurants and we would ask if there were any mistakes made or orders that weren't picked up, things like that. So it was really rough when I was with my dad. There would also be times where we didn't really have anywhere to sleep at night. So we might be at my grandma's house or one of his friends' houses, and once he gets enough liquor in the system, we gotta go. He had this personality where we were always getting kicked out of places, and sometimes we might have to sleep in one of his friends' cars or just ride the bus from one end of the route to another end of the route. It was really, really rough when I was growing up with my dad. So on the flip side of that, when I'm with my mom, she ended up remarrying someone else who had a crack cocaine addiction. So her and my stepdad together also weren't making the best example, they weren't the best providers, and they weren't really the best parents for us, right? They weren't bad people, they weren't people who wanted to be the way they were, but when you fall victim to these societal issues like addiction and poverty, sometimes it's hard to get out of that. So we would end up in situations where the houses that we live in have constant traffic from drug users, drug dealers, and that came along with issues like drug busts, police kicking in the door in the middle of the night, looking for the gang members and the drug dealers and not really caring that there's little kids in the house. It led to stays in foster care. It led to situations where there's drive-by shootings, bullets going through our home, while me and my sisters are there. Like, there's little kids in this house, but people don't really care in those situations. And one of the ways that my mom and my stepdad used to support their drug habit, they would go to big grocery stores. This was at a time when like cartons of cigarettes and batteries were just out there for you to pick up and take to the register and buy. They would go into these big grocery stores and steal cartons of cigarettes and batteries and take them and sell them to small corner stores so that they can get their drug money. And they loved to have their kids with them, at least one of us, because it helped them look a little less suspicious in the store. So at a young age, I'm being exposed to, crime, dishonesty as a method for survival, right? As a way to get the things that you want and need. So I wasn't in the presence of people who were setting a positive example. So you would think when I'm with my dad, it's messed up. When I'm with my mom, it's messed up. But kids get to leave home and go to school, right? Almost every single day. So you would think that when I'm at school, this is when I'm in my little safe haven. This is where I can actually grow, develop, and learn and ignore everything that's happening outside of there. However, all of the trauma that I had been through walked into the classroom with me. And this turns into things like disruption, blurting out, getting up out of your seat. You're doing things that are disruptive to other people's learning. It looks a lot like ADHD. Like, there's a lot of people who've experienced childhood trauma who have been misdiagnosed with ADHD and even medicated for it, when that really was just not the problem. And you see medications that are not really effective because it's not addressing the real root issues. But teachers' hands are kind of tied, right? Their success in their career is tied to getting certain test scores and getting students to hit certain benchmarks and learn certain things. So what you have to do is you have to remove the disruption from the environment, right? So that you can teach the other kids. So I'm constantly getting kicked out of class. I'm constantly getting suspended. I was even expelled in the 6th grade at McClure Middle School for something that I didn't even do. We moved back from Portland to Seattle around 1995 when I'm 9, turning 10 years old. And before, I was just a normal little kid with a rough upbringing, where I did little kid stuff. So I went outside to play and, things like that. But once I moved back to Seattle, I'm hanging with my older cousins who are like 3, 4 years older than me. So I'm turning 10, they're already 13, 14, they're already catching the bus places. And whatever they were, I looked up to them, so whatever they were doing, I was gonna go do that with them. If they wanted to go to the YMCA and play basketball, I'm gonna go to the YMCA and play basketball with them. But at the same time, if they wanted to go in the store stealing, I'm going into the store stealing with them. So I ended up having a lot of negative influences that surrounded me, and there was nobody really to combat that. There was nobody to say, don't do these things. So when me and my cousins learned about this little scheme that we could create, we created a fake nonprofit organization and walked around telling people we're collecting donations for basketball tournaments and things like that. My mom would be happy when I came home with a pocket full of money, or if I came home with a bunch of stolen clothes, because that meant, hey, I can't really provide for you anyway because we're so broke and poor and most of my money is going towards my addiction. So she didn't really look at it as a bad thing. Like, it was almost encouraged. Like, she would ask to borrow money and things like that. So this stuff started as necessity, right? It started with, okay, I'm dirt broke, I'm poor, I'm not being properly cared for, so turning to crime is my way to get the things that I need, whether it's the conning people out of money, going into stores, stealing. That's the stuff I was doing at a young age. But eventually it turned into greed. Like, it became this insatiable desire where I might have had several nice pairs of shoes, I might have had clothes on my back, things like that, a pocket full of money, but it was never enough. It made it where what started out of necessity, it turned to greed. I always wanted more and more and more and more and more. So my values were highly distorted, and who I was becoming was not a positive person. I was willing to do things that I just should not have been willing to do. But like I say, there was no one to show me another path or to show me the right way. So as I'm getting older, like getting towards the high school years, like I had first dropped out of school in the 6th grade because I got expelled, right? So they sent me from McClure Middle School, which was a regular middle school in Seattle, to Marshall Alternative High School. After I went to Marshall for a few days, I was like, this is not the place for me. Walked out the gym door, never came back. So this created major gaps in my education. And they started long before 6th grade, because when I'm in elementary school, I actually went to over 15 schools growing up. So there's constant moving. You know, we're switching schools, switching districts, and while other people my age are in class learning and there's a progression to that learning, I'm just having major gaps. I'm showing up and there's things that they're focused on that I have no clue what they're doing. Like there was just, I wasn't quite on the same page with peers my age. Honestly, still to this day, there's things that I just haven't picked up from, you know, that I should have learned in elementary school. So I ended up not really attending school too much, and that's why I call it the school to prison pipeline, because they just prepared me, removing me from the environment, removing me from my peers. Even though I didn't directly go, you know, from that young age to prison, I had dropped out first, things like that. They set the stage for me, you know, to feel like I'm not really like everybody else. I'm not worthy of what everyone else is receiving. I'm different. Like I'm the bad kid. I'm someone who needs to be removed. So what do I do when they're removing me? I'm in the streets even more. I'm stealing more. I'm conning people more, and I'm becoming pretty much a worse and worse person, you know? And I wasn't really a bad person, but I had distorted perceptions and very, very bad values at the time. So this ended up manifesting into me turning 16, 17 years old, and I hear about these widespread bank fraud schemes that are going on in this area. There's a lot of people who are cashing bad checks, they're doing little ATM card scams and things like that. And after seeing people who grew up like me, dirt poor, you know, make a lot of money, I'm like, look, where do I sign up at? One of my cousins, I remember him pulling up to my house in a Mercedes Benz, and I'm like, okay, I need to do what you're doing. I don't care about whatever type of, is it legal, is it a crime, whatever. I want what you have, so I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get it. So this ended up sparking a run where I went from being that dirt, broke, dead poor person to actually becoming what I thought was a success based on my distorted perceptions, because success was related to what you had, right? It's related to having a nice car, having nice clothes, having a bunch of girls, you know, things I'm hearing in rap music, seeing on movies, and exposed to from the people around me. So my view of success lied in money and possession. It didn't matter if you kept the money, did anything good with it, but you got money, you were able to spend it. That was my view of success. So I ended up making hundreds of thousands of dollars through this bank fraud scheme. And I actually went and bought myself a Mercedes Benz, a BMW, a Lexus. I ended up having enough money to do that. So I'm thinking, man, I'm the man now. I actually made it. Getting all the girls, everything, and people are all of a sudden attracted to me because I'm riding on 22s with TVs in my car. So I'm not realizing that this is the only reason they're around me, because I have money. If I'm dead broke, these people are nowhere to be seen. I'm like, okay, I'm successful now. But little did I know, what I thought was a path to success was actually a path to destruction. Like that money, those possessions, all of that stuff, the only thing it did for me was lead me to prison. It led to no positive outcomes. I didn't have any of that stuff anymore, but one day I found out that I had a warrant for my arrest. And when I found out that I had a warrant for my arrest, it was for 30 felonies at one time. These felonies included identity theft, theft 1, theft 2, conspiracy to commit all of these crimes, and I was like, dang, I need to do something about this. I don't want to, I had kids at the time. I fast forwarded now to when I'm about 20 years old. So I had kids at the time, and I decided I did not want to just be picked up on the streets by the police. So I hired a lawyer and turned myself in, trying to be proactive. I didn't have any criminal history at this point. And people were telling me, oh, you've never been in trouble before, so you'll be good. You can go to the courtroom, they might PR you, which means release on personal recognizance. You don't gotta pay a bail or anything. Like, you're a first timer, you're gonna be okay. But what happened was I ended up walking into the Pierce County Courthouse for my court date on October 2nd, 2006, and the prosecutor just made me out to be the worst person walking the earth, and I was labeled a flight risk, hit with a 6-figure bail, and I was stuck for the next 8.5 months. And while I'm sitting in the Pierce County Jail for those 8.5 months, I'm being told that I'm looking at decades in prison. So for me, I decided I'm not gonna just listen to that. I'm gonna kite the law library, and I'm gonna actually look at the paperwork and see what am I really looking at. My highest charge at that time was identity theft in the 1st degree, which carries a maximum of 7 years in prison, 84 months. So it wasn't adding up to me. Why are they telling me I'm looking at decades in prison if my highest charge only carries 7 years? What I found out was that the prosecutors and the detectives and everything were still actively investigating me for leading organized crime. So they wanted to take it from identity theft to where that would have been my actual charge, leading organized crime, like they would give like some mafia crime boss or something like that, and it comes along with decades in prison. One day, after sitting there for about 8 months, my lawyer came to me and he said, if you do not want them to file a leading organized crime charge against you and more counts of what you're already charged with, the only way out of that situation is if you plead guilty as charged to all 30 felonies that you're charged with right now. And my life was in this man's hands. I had paid him really good money to represent me, and there was nobody else who was advocating for me. There was nobody else in the system who was telling me any different. You know, he was the only one meeting with the prosecutors, discussing different plea bargains, and he would have been the one I had to rely on going to trial, but it didn't even seem to be an option for me. And I'm real young, and I'm actually real dumb when it comes to this stuff. So like for me, I knew I was guilty. I knew I had committed these. When I'm out here doing these bank scams, I'm not knowing what crime I'm committing. I didn't know it was identity theft or organized. I didn't know what I could get charged with, but the prosecutor wanted to make it as bad as it can possibly be. And they wanted to really do me in and end my life, I felt. You know, for someone to come in who has never been convicted of a crime before, this is the first time going through the system, and you want them to plead guilty to 30 felonies at one time, that person's gonna be treated as if they had been in and out of the system 29 times already. So you're really maxed out at 9 points. 9 felonies, you can get the most time anyone can get. So when they want 30 on my record, they could have dropped a lot of charges. That's what usually comes along with a plea bargain, is drop charges, maybe some agreement on the time you'll serve. But for me, it was plead guilty as charged to all 30 felonies, and the prosecutor's gonna recommend your maximum 7 years after that. Like for most people, like that's not a plea bargain. Like, you could have just pled guilty the first day you walked into your arraignment and got the same outcome. But my lawyer decided he was gonna fight to give me a drug offender sentencing alternative. So. What the drug offender sentencing alternative does is it makes it where half of your time pretty much gets knocked off and converted to probation. So I didn't even have a drug problem at the time, but I pretended like I did so that I could get half of my time. That's not something that I am ashamed of or anything like that, because I felt like my first time through the system, whatever happened to second chances. Like I kind of played the system, but it worked out for everybody involved, I feel, considering what I did after my release. But I ended up getting the drug offender sentencing alternative, which came along with a 36-month prison sentence, 36 months of probation. The 36-month prison sentence, you get half time on that because it's nonviolent crimes, which means 18 months, right? So when I ended up serving 20 total because the county time I didn't get half on. But when I walked out of prison in 2008, you know, I felt like, look, they were just telling me I'm looking at decades. I have 30 felonies on my record right now. I don't ever want to get in trouble again another day of my life, because then I'll probably be doing decades in prison. I'll probably get an exceptional sentence and really get broke off, you know? So I saw that as even though I had 30 felonies on my record, I still felt that I had a second chance because I was free like the very next year after I took that plea. There's other people who I know, they were able to stick them with leading organized crime and some other stuff, and they did nothing different than I did, you know? So I saw that as a second chance. And I decided I'm not going back to prison, but what do people do when they're not going back to prison? Like, how do you avoid that? I was 23 years old, I had a GED, I had no work, and the GED, I was lucky to have that. You know, I went to Tacoma Community College, I took the test, and I guessed on a lot of it, but somehow I passed the GED test and got my GED. So it wasn't a sign that I actually had like a high school education or anything like that, you know. So I'm looking at my prospects, I'm like, look, I need to find a job. So I look around for a job, I'm getting denied a lot, and ultimately I ended up finding a job at the Old Country Buffet at the Lakewood Town Center. And when I found that job at the Old Country Buffet at the Lakewood Town Center, it only took, similar to when I was at Marshall and other little places in my life, it only took showing up a few times before I realized it was not the place for me. I knew that if I was gonna trade this life of crime, trade hustling and scamming people, conning people, and it was gonna be permanent, like I wasn't gonna do this stuff anymore, then the alternative had to be something that was attractive to me. I didn't want to live a meaningless life. I didn't want to work a minimum wage job that would leave me trapped in poverty and come with a constant risk of just anything can happen and I'm gonna have to turn right back to this life of crime. So what ended up happening was I decided that wasn't for me, and I figured if I was gonna make something of myself, the only way I could do that was through education. If I was gonna go out and seek employment, the old country buffet, stuff like that was all I was qualified for. I had no experience. I had nothing to put on a resume that was positive besides like washing dishes in prison. You know, there was nothing else that I could really sell myself on. But I figured pursuing an education, that could open some doors for me. I didn't know what doors, but I figured it could open some doors for me. So I ended up enrolling here at Pierce College. I got out of prison June 2008. By September 2008, I was starting class here at Pierce College. And doing that completely transformed my life and gave me some sort of purpose. You know, I went from, you know, like, look, I have no options. When I was locked up, I'm being told by people who had been in and out, people who were older than me, there's nothing out there for you. You're not gonna be able to find a job. You're not gonna be able to find a place to live. You're not gonna find any type of support. Like, society wants nothing to do with people who are releasing from prison. There's no opportunities, no resources, or anything out there for you. But I decided not to embrace that and make that my truth. So I'm gonna go ahead and do what I can to make something happen. And Pierce College opened the door for me to do that. And despite my really rough K through 12 background, you know, I started out in the math lab here taking like middle school level math, stuff that my son in 5th grade is doing the stuff that I was learning at Pierce College when I first got here. You know, there was no way I was ready to jump straight into like a statistics class or anything like that. So I started out learning like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, order of operations, stuff like that. Do I do what's in parentheses first, the addition, subtract? I had to learn this stuff here at Pierce College. And if it wasn't for that math lab, I probably still wouldn't know it today, you know. They do the little test, so I tested really low. That's how I ended up in those classes. It took maybe, I think like 3 or 4 math classes before I actually made it to the college level. But my identity was transformed, you know, immediately upon stepping on this campus. No longer do I have to refer to myself, oh, I'm fresh out of prison, or oh, I'm a felon, or I'm a convict. Like, now my identity had become that of a college student. So I'm actually pursuing goals. I have to go to class. I have to do my reading, my writing, and assignments and things like that. So not only did it change my identity, it actually gave me a whole new lifestyle for myself that allowed me to avoid incarceration and things like that. So when I came to Pierce, I didn't have a whole lot of confidence. You know, like I said, my K through 12 experience was complete failure. It was totally rough. There was not a lot of successes there. And I brought a paper with me that I wrote in a class at UW Tacoma that can kind of speak to where my mindset was, you know, while I was a college student. So in this class, we had the requirement to, have you guys ever heard of like dependable strengths? So we had this assignment that was based on our dependable strengths, right? So we had to get in groups and we'd talk about it, write about it. And this is what I ended up writing in my reflection paper. Doing the dependable strengths biographical questionnaire was not very pleasant for me. Although I understand how it can be beneficial for people who can easily identify their good experiences, I really don't feel that someone like me has much to gain. Because it was so hard to even come up with good experiences that actually meet the criteria of being something I did well, and was proud of, I ended up having to use the milestone type of accomplishments, but they weren't really good enough. The main reason it was so difficult to identify my good experiences is because they simply didn't exist. Many people in my group mentioned playing sports or participating in hobbies or being part of a club or group, but I never had those experiences. I was on a couple sports teams when I was younger, but I never finished a season because I ended up moving. I never did well in school growing up. I have very limited work experience and I have never done anything work-related that I was proud of. There isn't much pride involved with filing papers and doing the petty work I have done. That was a result of work study. Like, I would not have even had that experience if it wasn't for work study. I was constantly in trouble in school. I didn't like school. I started skipping class by the 4th grade. I hardly attended middle school or high school. I got expelled. I was a dropout. I moved around a lot, never got comfortable in any one school, and I went to more schools than there are grades. When someone lives like that, there are not many positive experiences taking place that fit your criteria. All of my successes in life have taken place since entering college. Although getting my GED, graduating with my associate's degree, and getting accepted to UW-T are not good enough to qualify as good experiences, and I put quotes on that because that's what they call part of the dependable strengths activity. They're the only positive things that have happened in my life. and they're the only things I can say that I'm proud of. I didn't see any pattern or strengths as a result of doing this assignment. I'm able to identify my strengths if simply asked what my strengths are, but this exercise didn't really ask the right questions to bring those out. I recall a question specifically asking about things before I was 17, but I'm 28 years old now, and I don't feel that any strengths I might have had before the age of 17 would still be relevant now, unless I could identify situations in which I've used those strengths more recently. It felt horrible trying to focus on the positive because there was none. As far as things that actually meet the criteria to count for this assignment, at least. I actually got kind of emotional thinking about how negative my life was up until recent memory. I know that the goal was to bring out positives, but for people like me, it kind of just makes us feel bad when there are none. I guess because I am in college, it is assumed that we all come from similar walks in life, but I came from the gutter, and I was too focused on survival growing up to do anything that would qualify as good experiences under your criteria. I am actually happy that the assignment slipped my mind because I would have hated explaining to my group why my good experiences were so vague and didn't meet the requirements. The past is behind me and it can stay there. I am focused on my present and future. I am in the process of turning tragedy to triumph, and whether it counts for the assignment or not, that is good enough for me. So this just shows like kind of my mindset, while I was a college student. Before I had really made anything of myself, but I had these little minor successes under my belt. So like with each class that I passed at Pierce College, for example, it boosted my confidence. It helped aid my self-esteem, right? But before college, there was none of that. There was nothing I could really pull from. So enrolling at Pierce College, it gave my life meaning and purpose that would have never existed without education. This was actually an assignment that I wrote and turned in to my professor in that class, and the response was pretty much just blank, right? Like she didn't know what to say. But it just goes to show, that enrolling in college gave me that little work experience that I ever had. I never had any work experience before I had work study here at Pierce College. I never had anything I would consider a success. So everything that I listed was directly related to my experience at Pierce College. So I ended up earning my associate's degree in 2011. I was in the chemical dependency professional program, so I wanted to be a drug and alcohol counselor. I wanted to take that path because of my family history. Everyone around me, my aunts, my uncles, my mom, my dad, addiction had pretty much destroyed their lives and the lives of their children. So I wanted to help other people avoid that. But while my classmates are, getting licensed by the state and earning their trainee hours in that field, what happened with me was I had 30 felonies on my record. I was scared of the background check that was attached to that. So I wasn't able to get that same experience. But my degree came with a direct transfer agreement, and it gave me a path to go forward to the University of Washington, Tacoma. So when I got to the University of Washington, Tacoma, I had walked across the stage at Pierce. It was my first time in my life. I felt I had a major accomplishment, right? Something to be proud of. My mom and my dad were there. They got to see me graduate, walk across the stage, and it opened the door for me to go forward with a 4-year degree, pursue a bachelor's degree. But I still didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I didn't know really what I was doing there. The drug and alcohol counseling stuff was behind me at that point. I felt that it wasn't gonna work out for me. I was scared, like the background checks terrified me. If I have 30 felonies on my record, how are they gonna accept me? They might have, had I actually done it, but I was in my own way. I had these internal barriers, confidence, self-esteem, and thinking that society would not accept me. Back then, they honestly probably would have denied me. Today, probably not. So once I got to UW-Tacoma, I just started seeing more and more successes, and my confidence was boosted. And I have a little quote here from some scholars called Reason, Terenzini, and Domingo, and it says, most students, in particular low-income students, do not measure their success by the common metrics of the first year, second year, and so on, as do researchers. Success is typically measured one course at a time. And in those courses, one class at a time, one leading to another over the course of the semester. Early successes, whether in the beginning classes or in the first courses of a program of study, impact the likelihood of future success. Conversely, early failure substantially undermines success. For this reason, academic support activities such as those noted above are most commonly applied to the key first semester courses adopted curriculum. So when I first got to University of Washington, Tacoma, it was like a reset, right? I came from community college level to university level. In that first quarter, I failed a class. And I failed that class not because I couldn't do it, not because of the material, but because we were required to go out and interview somebody in the community, and I was scared to do it because of my criminal history. I didn't know if I made the call, set up the interview with this woman. It was an older white lady who was real big in the art scene in Tacoma, and she invited me to her house to do the interview. And like I started going through this intern, do I have to tell her that I'm a convicted felon? Do I have to tell her about my criminal history? Would she want me in my house and in her house if she knew, things like that? And I ended up, it went from that, it was so extreme for me internally that I just stopped attending that class and ended up with a 0.0 despite the fact that I was passing up until that point. So I had a lot of internal stuff that I was dealing with, despite the fact that I was successful at Pierce. Then when I got to UW, it just keeps resetting, right? And I'm still experiencing trauma and things like that, but I was able to graduate from the University of Washington, Tacoma with my bachelor's, with 2 bachelor's degrees actually, one in psychology and one in what's called interdisciplinary arts and sciences with a concentration on self and society, which is a degree they don't offer anymore, so I'm glad I double majored. But even when I graduated with my bachelor's, I still didn't know quite what I wanted to do with myself career-wise. I was going to be competing with people who had never been in trouble, had no criminal history, things like that. And, I was like, how do I make myself more competitive? And I decided to go into grad school. And I wanted to pursue a master's in social work. I wanted to help, similar to when I was pursuing the drug and alcohol counseling, it's about helping people from backgrounds similar to mine. But after inquiring about my prospects of entering that program, I was told by one of the faculty members, it's not going to work out for you. You're not going to be able to land the internships that are required for you to earn your degree. And, when he told me that, I was kind of devastated. I'm like, dang. So I now have 3 college degrees under my belt. There's been some time that has passed, but my criminal history is still in my way of me going forward. I found out later that faculty member overstepped their boundaries, really. He should have never told me that. I know people who have criminal convictions who have masters in social work from the same exact program I wanted to apply to. So this guy, he let his own internal bias kind of get in the way, and I just accepted what he told me, right? So it kind of led me down this path where I then applied for a Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies. And getting into that program, once again, it was a brand new start. I'm dealing with the imposter syndrome, everything all over again, right? From when I first came to Pierce, when I first got to UW Tacoma, and now when I'm first entering grad school, I'm kind of feeling like I don't quite belong here. Like maybe they didn't recognize, they made a mistake when they accepted me, things like that, But I did belong, and I was able to complete that as well. So I ended up earning my master's degree in interdisciplinary studies through research on preventing recidivism through post-secondary education. Recidivism, that's when an individual finds themselves incarcerated, they commit a crime, they get locked up for it, they release, and then they commit a new crime, and they go back to jail or prison. So research says that attending college can play a major role in decreasing the risk for recidivism. And that is something that had actually played out in my life through the lifestyle changes, the identity changes, things like that. So I wanted to help other people make similar transitions. So I designed, rather than writing a thesis, I designed the curriculum and a workbook for a prison to college workshop. I ended up signing a contract with Tacoma Community College to actually offer that workshop, and I ended up doing a lot of networking. I met people who really boosted my confidence and self-esteem and told me I have worth and value in a lot of situations that other people might not have because of my criminal history, right? So what had once been a barrier and my biggest detriment, once I was in grad school, I was able to flip that around and turn it into an asset and my greatest strength. Like that's, when you can turn your barriers, your hard times, your adversity into a strength, I feel like the outcomes are not only great for you, but for everybody who comes from backgrounds similar to yours. And I ended up finding that value, finding my voice, ended up starting to do a lot of different public speaking. I was hired by South Seattle College as a faculty member and a case manager. So my faculty job, I was teaching at the Kent and Berrien Department of Corrections offices, teaching life skills, helping individuals who are on probation or releasing from prison, build their life back up, navigate resources and things like that. I ended up being a keynote speaker at a CPTS, Community Partnership for Transition Solutions. It was my first keynote speech. And from there, I started doing a lot more public speaking, events for the Seattle Times. I've been featured in the News Tribune and the Seattle Times as well. And also in 2018, Pierce College named me a Distinguished Alumni Award winner. And after that point, that was the greatest accomplishment of my life, you know? Because like I said, I came to this campus in 2008 with a GED and 30 felonies. Who would have imagined that someday I would be back being handed an award, a trophy by the mayor of Tacoma, you know, who had also won the same award previously. So I've had a lot of major accomplishments. I published my first book, Transforming Society's Failure, from academic research that I was doing. I used a method called autoethnography. Had to write about my own experiences a lot. I was like, why not put this into a book form and get it out there? So I've had a lot of accomplishments, and they're all tied to education. And I could have easily took another path. I just don't know what that would have looked like, and it would not have been pursuing my purpose. So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna open it up for if anyone has any questions about my journey, going from that disadvantaged background to prison, to college, and actually success in college, then I'll go ahead and take those questions, and afterward move on. All right.
Okay. Go ahead. Oh, if you could go ahead, I was looking it up.
So I went to 15 different schools as well, from starting out until going, I think, went to high school. Was the last school I ended up spending the rest of the years out of school. Being in that situation and feeling like you're behind, you're always behind. You know, you go to a different school and they're already ahead of you, and being stuck and no one wants to, you know, sweep you underneath the rug like that. What do you think that someone could have said to you, or if you had a mentor like that, do you think it would have been different for you? Like if they would have talked to you about school at an early age, do you think that would have made a difference?
I think at an early age, my environment and circumstances was just so messed up that no words really would have been able to change that, right? Like you can try to encourage me or inspire me as much as you want to, but there's no helping me without helping my parents. You know, when they're trapped in this addiction and they're creating these, I'm pretty much just following I'm a kid, I don't have any control of my life, right? So there wasn't much that could happen when I'm switching schools constantly, when I'm getting expelled and kicked out of class. I don't feel like there was much that could have been done for me at that point without helping my parents as well. And that's something that I think people are coming along to see, right? Like we cannot help students who are having struggles without including their parents in that. But later on in life, you know, I would have been far more receptive, and I would have benefited more, I feel, from just having a mentor, someone who was, I'm not gonna say it would have been worthless. It would have been great to know that someone cared, that I had support, that there was somebody who even noticed me, right? Or noticed that I had potential. So I don't know how that would have played out, really. But I feel like if this person was in my life and then we just moved away, it wouldn't have been as impactful as it could have been.
And this is due to relationship with prison and education and books. In recent news, books like Frederick Douglass's personal narrative and E.J.I.'s Lynching in America, what is your stance on prison book banning policies, especially books that directly affect the African American community?
Yeah, banning books in prison is completely out of pocket. You know, there's access to, even if it's opinion that is radical, that, you know, you completely disagree with, when you limit that information, like that's oppression. Like people should have access to anything that's been written, I feel. And there's been certain little ways that they do. They might say, oh, the books have to come in through a certain channel, when there was organizations just coming dropping them off and things like that. And they're doing it intentionally, I feel. That there's some people who really feel that prison is about punishment. These people are the scum of the earth. We don't need to do anything to support them, really. So I think it's a horrible thing that they're banning books in prison. There's people in prison who are writing books, creating, and they can be further inspired as long as they have access to reading and things like that. You mentioned 2 specific books, but I mean, when they ban organizations from bringing in even self-help books and stuff like that, it gets even deeper, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible.
So I think that your book is in a few correctional facilities and prisons. Do you think that your book being in those facilities has helped any people that are currently
for sure, definitely. I'm in the prisons all the time, whether it's youth or adult, and almost every time I step in there, I receive feedback from somebody who read my book, you know, and they tell me how it's impacted them. Even if it's just, I needed an example of someone who came from an area I came from, and they were living similar to me, and they were able to make it out of that. You know, I get it a lot. I remember walking into Echo Glen, which is a youth prison here in our state, a couple months ago, and this young lady, she looked at me, she was like, "Oh my God, you're Omari." I'm like, I'm not a celebrity, you know what I'm saying? Like, she really thought that I was a celebrity just because the impact that I had made on her. She had read my book. I get people who reach out to me once they're released, sometimes sending emails, reaching out through my website. And that book, like, me, an author, like actually publishing it, it's just destiny, right? Like, it was supposed to happen because I could have never imagined that for myself. And when I first put it out there, it actually was not, there was no editor. Like, I was the editor. There was no publishing company. I was the publishing company, you know? So there was mistakes in there, and there were typos, all that, but people were able to overlook that and receive the message. There's actually a new version of the book coming out that's gotten rid of all that stuff. There's been a second version where it's cleaned up a lot, but I'm coming out with a final version of Transforming Society's Failure that hopefully will go in even more prisons, because it's in every adult prison in this state, every juvenile prison in this state, but I want it to go nationwide, and I got to clean it up a little bit.
Have you thought about trying to get your record expunged or vacated?
I did think about that, and one of my psychology professors, she had said to me, like, you can get your record expunged or you can turn it into a strength. You can turn it into your greatest asset. Nothing that I do today would be possible if I was walking around acting like I never got in trouble. Like, almost everything is based on the struggle that I've been through, the fact that I came from this rough background, that I was incarcerated, and I was able to get out and make something of myself. You know, like earning a master's degree, there's a lot of people who've done that, right? Bachelor's, and so there's a lot of people who've done that. But it's where I came from, where people find value in my experiences and things like that. So I thought about it, but now it's not even something that I want to do. And honestly, I've been out so long now that on a lot of applications for jobs and things like that, I can check no on the box that I've never been in trouble.
So far back.
Yeah. My conviction happened I pled guilty in 2007, so that's considered my conviction date. And it's been 13 years now. So I don't see, there's definitely still barriers, collateral consequences that come along with my conviction, but I've embraced that rather than running from it. And when I walk into these youth prisons and stuff, it's the fact that I've been there that makes these guys, you know, receptive to what I have to say.
Yeah.
Did I see another thing here? All right. So moving forward, I just want to, this is a list of like just certain things, you know, barriers. These are definitions from Merriam-Webster.com, by the way. So barriers is defined as something that blocks or is intended to block passage. So here I've just listed things that were in my way of even succeeding once I came to Pierce College, right? So that included that negative K through 12 experience. I actually hated school. Like school, I felt the people there were my enemies, and it was not something that I really liked at all. Education, I'm like, this is not for me. This is not something I'm good at. This is something that is not for me at all. And that led to that lack of confidence, you know, and the major gaps in my education played a role in that. I was a first-generation student, so I didn't have anyone who could walk me through different processes and things like that. I didn't have anyone I could talk to or anything, not parents, not aunties, not mentors. And I was kind of dealing with some social anxiety type issues here where I might be able to seek support on campus, but am I actually going to walk into that office and talk to these people? You know, am I actually going to stick around and make friends after class? Especially with my criminal history. When I came to Pierce College, I was one of those students, I came to class and I immediately just dipped out. You know, I left. So I was a single parent. I had 2 kids to take care of by myself. Their mom was actually in prison when I started at Pierce. And this is coming along with having to get them to daycare, having to cook them dinner every night, having to get them fed and everything. You know, that's for someone who was only months removed from prison, like that is a lot on your plate. And a lot of competing priorities. So my probation, I had to report to a probation officer. I was receiving food stamps and benefits from the state that came with different classes I had to take, job searches and things like that. So there was a lot of barriers in my way to not only becoming a college student, but especially succeeding. And then during college, you know, there was a lot of adverse events, a lot of things that prevented success, development, or it was harmful or unfavorable. So as I was about to graduate from Pierce College, up to that point, I had no real experiences with death, but my stepdad passed away. You know, I couldn't remember having gone to any funerals before that or anything, but once my stepdad passed, me, my mom, my sisters, we now had to plan a funeral. And nobody even had any money or anything to work with, so we're trying to gather money. There's just a lot to go on, and I'm trying to graduate. This is right before I'm about to graduate in my last, it might have been my last quarter here at Pierce, you know, so dealing with the death of my stepdad was a threat to my progress. And then once I started at UW-Tacoma, the first year, spring quarter, my mom died as well. You know, so once again, I'm having to plan a funeral, but I still have to attend class. I still have reading to do. I still have papers to write. I still have a lot of stuff, you know, for school, and I can't just drop that because if I do, it's over. I'm gonna fail, right? I might be able to get it incomplete or work some things out, but I didn't want to stop my progress. Once I was in grad school, my very first quarter in grad school, my dad died. You know, so once again, planning funerals, attending funerals, things like that, while I'm trying to make progress as a college student. My sister ended up passing right before I graduated with my master's. That's a lot of death for someone to deal with while they're a college student. And it's not just like, for example, I'll be going to a funeral on Saturday because my grandma passed, and I didn't have to plan anything. I get to just show up, right? Like there were other people who were in charge of that. But when you're in charge of like setting stuff up, it can really take a toll on you. So all of these deaths, all of these losses were a major threat to my progress in college. My son was hospitalized. You know, I found out that he had a kidney condition. Like his body was filling up with water and stuff. And this is like during my time as a college student, right? So I'm having to go deal with his hospitalization and his medical needs. There's been some stays at like Seattle Children's and things like that. One time I had myself dealt with a medical situation where I had to have surgery. And even though we were able to set it up where the surgery was between quarters, there were still impacts once that next quarter started. Ended up having a lot of car problems. You know, during my time, I was in college for like 8 years, going from the GED to a master's degree. So during that time, I had all kinds of transportation issues, right? Like transportation is a major threat, especially with a school that's like way over here. If you live somewhere far away, sometimes it can be hard to get here. Then I had issues, I had mentioned failing that class and things like that, which meant failure to meet satisfactory academic progress. How do I navigate that? What do you do? When you, I don't know about Pierce right now, but I remember at UW-Tacoma especially, if you have to file a satisfactory academic progress appeal, you have to go on your own and do this paperwork. You have to on your own explain to them what happened and why it won't happen again. There's not like anyone offering resources or support or anything like that. It's up to you to make that happen. So I was experiencing barriers that kind of didn't have anything to do with college or might have predated college, but then there were a lot of adverse events that were during college that really threatened my progress, you know? So I had to, in order to do this, I had to really know why I'm doing it. Like, it's easy to give up, right? When you start facing adversity and when you're facing hard times, it's easy to just say, forget everything, I'm gonna drop everything and just stay home and sleep all day, right? But I had my why in order. You know, I knew why I was in school. I knew it was the only way for me to make something of myself. I knew that my kids needed me to succeed in school, and I knew that I could not quit. So through all of these problems, I just persisted. I kept showing up, you know? And I ended up doing pretty good despite the circumstances, I would say. So I have a little short video to show you guys on finding your why. Pull up the browser for this. Has anyone already seen this?
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's, you know, it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, you know, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about, just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
So I figured that was a nice little video to show you guys, to discuss, and to introduce the topic of our whys. So I just want to hear from some of you guys, you know, who are here, your college students.
Comedian Michael Jr. here. Yo, I'm
Sorry
excited. We about to have a blast. We gonna talk. We gonna kick.
So I want to know, what are some of your whys? You know, you're all college students here at Pierce College, but why? Anyone? Like, what brought you here?
Get a good job.
To get a good job. Got it. Anyone else?
I personally come from Germany. I moved here 6.5 years ago, and I only went to 9th grade. That's my highest education. My dad's highest education is 9th grade as well, and my mom's 5th grade. So I came here to make a change because when I was 16, I had a kid, and so I was a single mom. So when I looked at my daughter, I said, I want to give you a better future than I had, and so I came here, and that's my why.
For sure. Appreciate that. Anybody else? What's your why?
So my why is mainly I want to major in business. I came from a really rough past. Don't have many people to look up to, family support, and so this is me kind of taking a step and saying I want to make something of myself and make an impact on other people, because everyone could get somewhere as long as they try.
For sure.
And a lot of my family decided not to try when they could have.
Appreciate that. How about one more? Anybody else? So it's really important that we not only know what we are doing, but we know exactly why we are doing it as well. You know, for all of us, being a college student is the what, right? But some of our motivations are different. Some of us came here because we just feel it's what you do after high school, right? Or my parents wanted me to be a college student. I knew it would make them proud. For some people, it's about breaking generational curses or climbing out of poverty, you know? But that why is something that we have to keep in the back of our mind at every moment. And it's something that will really help us overcome those difficult beginnings and finish strong. If we don't have our whys in order, then difficult beginnings can often lead to us just checking out, right? We hit that adversity and we give up because our why is not strong enough. This isn't something that I'm doing out of purpose or out of passion, or, you know, it's not something that I can tie a real life outcome to. But if I am pursuing a degree in a certain field and it's attached to a purpose and a passion, then the work that I do every step of the way, you know, not just earning my degree, but for each class that I take, each assignment that I do, the way that I do my reading is going to be different. You know, I had a habit, you know, sometimes if I ended up in some random classes, man. Like I ended up taking classes just off the title sometimes. I didn't really know what I was doing a lot of the time in college. But I would end up in some classes that I noticed, okay, I'm not interested in what's being talked about. It's not going to apply to my future. And in those classes, I got my lowest grades. My lowest amount of effort was put into those classes. But when it was like the drug and alcohol classes, the psychology classes, the classes that I could attach to my purpose and my future, my effort was just far greater. But that was because I wasn't thinking about the long run, right? So those classes that even the topic didn't intrigue me, if I was walking in my purpose and knowing that there was a end game to that being an honor student can lead to some things, or, you know, I'm gonna want to transfer someday, right? That would have really impacted the amount of effort that I put into that class and my motivation to actually finish strong. You know, there wouldn't have been situations where I just stop attending a class because I can't interview somebody, because my purpose and my why is so strong that I have to go through with this. If I don't, my future's on the line, right? And, you know, like I said, that really impacted me in a negative way when I did that. When I stopped attending the class, I had to file that satisfactory academic progress appeal, threaten my financial aid, and some more things. So when we have our whys in order, I just feel like everything we do, we just put far more into it, we get greater outcomes, you know. So just know your whys, keep that in the back of your mind, and stay focused on that, and recognize it's about the end game. It's not always gonna be fun, it's not always gonna be easy, but when you put in your best effort, then you know you're just helping your end game. So I have a little, I don't know, who feels comfortable volunteering, coming up here and play a little game? Does anyone feel comfortable doing that? You guys seem like a shy group, so as I was going, I was like, I don't know, I don't even want to ask questions. Like, dang, she don't want to do what I'm about to ask them to do. Anyone feel comfortable coming up here volunteering to play a game?
What's the game about?
You get to eat cookies and win a prize. You'll do it? Thank you. Anyone else want to volunteer to do that? Like, I can take up to 3. Up to 3 volunteers.
Come on, you guys.
You get free cookies.
Okay, so what I need you guys to do, you might want to remove your glasses for this.
Are we catching these in our mouth?
Yes.
Oh, no, I want to leave them on then. I've had eye surgery, so, yeah.
You know, well, I don't know if this will work with the glasses on. Because what you do is you have to put the cookie on your forehead without touching it, get it into your mouth.
Oh, I think Cameron should come in.
Got it.
As a student life director, I have actually done this activity several times before, so.
So you'll catch him, right?
I've never actually won it either, so.
Don't want to.
You never won it?
No.
So you put it on your forehead without touching it, using your hands or anything. You want to just slide it down your face into your mouth.
So like right up here?
Yep, right up
Alright.
there.
It's already sliding because of the
Oh,
bangs.
your hair, your bangs.
Okay. You gonna tell us when to go?
Yeah, go ahead, go.
Oh, okay.
We can give you a fresh cookie.
Okay, yeah, not off the floor. Alright.
It's like stuck.
getting closer. Oh! Trying to keep the cookie from going off the ground.
We'll let you guys both try again.
One more time.
Interesting.
Just on the
Oh my
Oh,
god,
almost
this is
had it.
bad. I almost got that.
It's not easy.
It is not. It's a challenge. Like I said, I remember won this game. Oh,
Close.
close. Is there a time limit? Like 30 more seconds?
10 more seconds.
Oh, man. This is almost.
Alright, so thank you guys for volunteering. And since you guys volunteered, I have a copy of my book for you.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
All right. Thanks.
For sure. I'll sign before we're done. So I wanted one of them to finally get it in there. Actually, wait. I need you guys to stand there for a second, sorry. I wanted one of them to actually finally get it in their mouth. The purpose, the reason I'm doing this is because the topic of today is overcoming tough beginnings and finishing strong, right? So at the start with this, how did it feel? Like, this is your first time seeing it? You've seen it before. Like, how did it feel being told to put the cookie on your head and then get it, like, it's foreign, right?
I mean, like, I'm kind of a weird person, so this was like normal for me, but I'm in front of like strangers, so I was like super awkward about it too. I was like, they're watching me try to eat a cookie and I can't get it in my mouth.
So you guys both tried to do it the first time, and it didn't go too well, right?
Didn't.
So what happened after that? After the first time it didn't go too well, like, were there any processes going through your mind? Like, let me try something different, or like, what was your process the next time?
Well, you know, once it hit the ground, I was like, well, I don't want the cookie to go on the ground. That's why I was kind of keeping my hands up here to keep it, you know, from falling. But I think I kind of turned my head a little bit when I felt it kind of, I feel like I had a couple near misses, you know. I don't know, did I have a couple near misses? Okay, so, because it felt like it was getting there and it seemed like turning my head a little bit, you know, helped.
It seemed like you
Make better
identified your
progress.
nose as an obstacle to getting it straight down and
Yeah.
tried to work around that, right?
Yeah.
So like I feel like this activity right here is a great metaphor for difficult beginnings and when someone gets it in their mouth eventually.
Yeah.
But it's just, they started with something that was foreign. They had to identify obstacles, you know, like their nose was in the way of them getting it there. Maybe make an adjustment to the speed or, you know, things like that. Like try to make it go slowly down your face, but they had to make adjustments. They didn't just try to do the same way every single time, right? And that's the same way we need to do as college students or anything else in life. When we have a rough start, things don't go right that first time. We need to analyze, make adjustments, identify obstacles, and then make it happen. We don't give up, right? But with this one, no one got it in their mouth, so we ended up giving up at the end just for the sake of time. But
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks.
So, I hope you guys get the message I'm trying to convey with that. It was my first time that I saw, actually Christopher Johnston had did that. He told me
Oh,
he got
yeah.
it from Pierce College.
Yeah.
So I figured it would be just a great little metaphor for overcoming tough beginnings and finishing strong, because you have to analyze, is this working, is that working, figure out what works, right? So, like I said, our topic, overcoming adversity, graduating from college and finishing strong. These are some principles that will help us get there, right? One is when we hit those hard times, like when the cookie first drops on the floor, they didn't just pick it up with their hand and put it in their mouth, like break the rules or things like that. So you want to make sure that you never take shortcuts or cheat yourself out of the process. If you're in a class, for example, and there's reading to do, some people will just skip that reading and go straight to taking the exam without learning it first. And it's common, like this stuff is common, but you're kind of robbing yourself of some depth, some material, some content, things where you'll be able to actually hold a conversation with somebody about this stuff. And other people, they take it so far, they might go to plagiarism, they might go to copy and things like that. It's a shortcut. Shortcuts usually are gonna get you in trouble. We can think of shortcuts in a positive way as like just a faster way to get to the same destination. But in college, when people try to take shortcuts, they end up cheating themselves in the long run. You also want to make sure that you grow through your adversity. So when the cookie drops the first time, you want to, why did it just drop? What did I do that was wrong? What can I learn from this experience of not getting the cookie in my mouth? So we can never fail and we can never lose as long as we learn something from our failures and our hard times and we keep on pushing, right? So if we're able to grow through adversity, if anything happens in our life that might have been considered to be negative, there's something to learn from that and you can turn it into a positive. The next key, network equals net worth. I mentioned I was one of those college students who wasn't making a lot of friends on campus because I would come and go, but it's really good to build a support network here on campus, whether it's with teachers, advisors, counselors, different people on campus, and also your classmates, people you can tap into and have conversations with. If you don't build that network for yourself, then once again you are robbing yourself because there are people who can really help you out when hard times hit. You want to make sure that there's a constant analysis. You know, even if you did great on something, figure out why you did great. If you did poorly on something, figure out why is that? Was it that I didn't put in enough preparation? Did I not have enough time, you know, allotted for my reading and things like that? Make sure you're constantly analyzing your processes while you're here in college, and that's going to help you. If you have a slow start, actually correct that. If there's no analysis after a slow start, then you might just keep on going down that same path. You want to utilize your campus resources. I don't have a list of what's available here at Pierce, but I would hope that you are all familiar with what is available if you're students here. You should know if there's a counseling center. You should know if there's academic tutors or a writing center where you can get help with a paper. You want to make sure that you're utilizing those campus resources to your advantage. It might be some type of financial support. There's just a lot of different things that can come up during your time in college that can lead to a very difficult beginning. And I'm talking about a difficult beginning in your first quarter. It could be a difficult beginning in just a single class or whatever, right? But as long as you utilize those campus resources that are here for you and funded for you, then you're going to have better outcomes in the long run. Communication is also a very important key to overcoming those tough beginnings and finishing strong. If you're in a class and you have, I'm going to be taking a trip this quarter, right? You might want to make sure you let your professor know that early on. Some people, they'll just disappear. They're just not going to show up. But if you communicate and communicate early, you can get people on your side and get them bought in to support you, you know? And they also get a chance to get to know you a little bit more. You're not just a random face to them. So if you communicate, you talk, then you can get some really positive outcomes. I've heard of students who were who was it? There was someone who was in their last quarter, I believe here, and they were on the verge of failing a class because of a major requirement. And because they decided to show up to office hours and communicate with their professor, arrangements were made and they were able to actually succeed. If they would not have communicated, they would have just took their failing grade and that would have been the end of it. So communicate early. Don't be scared of judgment or, oh, my teacher's gonna think that I don't know anything, things like that. Just make sure that you communicate with them and really pave the way for a clear, you know, if you're taking a trip, if you just need some extra support. There's been times where I had to get it incomplete. I might not have finished their class till that next quarter, but without communication, I could have never done that. You want to make sure that you embrace opportunities that lead to growth. So like student government, different opportunities on campus. You're going to be walking by and seeing flyers that say, sign up for this, sign up for that. Embrace those opportunities because that's going to make your network grow and it's going to lead to growth within yourself. When you come out of your comfort zone, that's where growth takes place. If you stay within your comfort zone, there is no growth in that. You know, it's like we're just doing the status quo. So embrace opportunities that lead to growth so that you can enhance your network, skills, and abilities. And I feel like resiliency is who knows what resiliency is? Can you tell us what that is?
Or basically just like bouncing back after a challenge.
For sure. After a hard time, after a challenge, you have the ability to bounce back. And I feel like that is a choice. Some people have these hard times and they make the choice not to bounce back. I mean, I'm not going to oversimplify it because there's a lot of different types of adversity, right? But with a lot of things, some people do not choose resiliency. They choose to like sulk or be down on themselves or give up or quit or not really go communicate or put in any effort. And if you choose resiliency, then you're going to have positive outcomes at the end of that. If you make a conscious choice that whatever this is I'm going through, it's only for a moment. This is temporary. This is not going to last forever. And you choose resiliency, then you're going to see very positive outcomes in everything that you're doing. And that doesn't mean that everything's gonna be a success. It means that you're either gonna learn from it, you're gonna grow from it, or you're gonna see that success, right? And you need to have an attitude of gratitude. I've seen far too many college students just act like they hated the fact that they were even in college. It's like, this is not high school or middle school or anything. We came here by choice. And I've had classmates that it's like, oh, I don't want to be there, or I'm trying to hurry up and leave, this and that. It's like, why? You know, if you can be grateful for this opportunity that you have, rather than having a negative mindset, that as well will lead to more positive outcomes. Have an attitude of gratitude. Recognize that there's some places, whether it's a different country, whether it's right here in America, where you might not have had that same opportunity to just be a college student and be free. You know, there were times that I, as a black man, would have definitely not been allowed in here. And when you have to be grateful for these opportunities in order to produce positive outcomes. And that's about all that I had for you guys today. I'll open it up for questions if there's any more discussion that you guys want to have. That's the end of my presentation.
I had a question for you. So are there any people that, you know, like, you grew up with on the streets or whatnot, who you've been able to kind of reconnect with them, or they see where you are now, and like, you know, if so, like, how do they respond to that? Are they like, you know?
Yeah, so most of the people who I know from like that past life, a lot of them were family members who will always be in my life, like the people I ran with the most. And I would say they've been inspired by it, right? I've been able to take one of my cousins who's been in and out of prison, in and out of jail, to a lot of my events with me. Like, he might be there just sitting, listening, or taking pictures, but I'm just exposing him to the environment. Like, I've taken him to the faculty and staff, a color conference, and things like that. And he's never been to college before, doesn't have a GED or diploma, but the conversations that we're having, I can see the growth. I can see his mind kind of being inspired. He might not want to take my path, but I can tell that it's having a positive influence. And then I've had other people who have flat out told me the reason I went back to school is because you showed me it was possible, right? So this is what keeps me going. You know, I just had a message yesterday from a young person. Like, it's not a family member or someone I connected with before, but a young person who was in a prison that I went to speak to, and they're just like, just hearing your story, like, it inspired me so much, and it makes me want to change my life for the better. Like, that's the stuff that keeps me going, because I know it's making me an impact, whether they're people who are close to me already or complete strangers. That's the mission that I'm on. I want to change the narrative around people from backgrounds similar to mine, whether it's incarceration or not, and introduce new possibilities.
I grew up in Tilgham during the meth epidemic, and very similar things that went on. Sometimes it's hard for me to go back around the people that I grew up with, especially like friends that maybe I played with, where their parents like cooked meth in their houses, and they're just damaged by that mentally and emotionally. And how do you deal with that, like going back to like maybe the neighborhoods that you were at and seeing that effect, that like, you know, that this is probably where it's going to be at for them for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, so the neighborhoods I grew up in, they're just not the same anymore because of gentrification.
Yeah.
So it's not, even outside of Seattle, you know, like everything's just changed over the years. So I wouldn't say there's a specific location where I go to and see a bunch of people, but I mean, just being on Facebook and connecting with random people, I ended up connecting with a lot of my old friends I hadn't seen in years, right? And some of them, they'll want to hang out or link, but the way I do it, I'm not the type of person who likes to completely cut people off, because I feel like I can be that positive influence on them, but I'm also not going to go hop in the car with them, right?
Yeah.
I'm not, if I know that Johnny loves to ride in cars with guns and drugs and is always getting arrested for it, then I'm not going anywhere with Johnny, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I can be on social media and you're seeing different things that I'm doing out here, or if I just run into you at the grocery store, it's gonna be all love. Let's give each other a hug, dap up. But you just have to know your triggers, know your limits, know your boundaries. You know, I was fortunate enough to not have addiction issues, but if I did, there would be a lot of people that I need to avoid that I probably don't avoid right now, right? It doesn't mean I'm with my kids most of the time, but you know, when I got out at 23 years old, so I was going to nightclubs and stuff like that, having fun and doing random things, but like I said, it was just about knowing, don't get in the car with that person. Do not set up any plans to go hang with them at some hotel and there's actually been people who have, because of the large amount of money that I made when I was hustling, there's a lot of people that I might have put their first $1,000 in their pocket, or I might have been the reason they were able to make a bunch of money. And when I got out, they're kind of trying to fill it out. Is he gonna get back into that? Like, let's do. So I've had some people, it might have been just one conversation about like, oh, are you getting back in it? And then that was the end of it. I never had anyone trying to pressure me or pull me back into that life. It's been nothing but love and support, and like I said, there's certain things like, if you're a gang member, for example, I wasn't a gang member, like sometimes your gang is gonna have issues with you turning your life around, which is so petty, but I avoided stuff like that.
Did you ever, when you got out of prison, did you ever think about or make apologies to the people that you took money from?
The people I took money from were bailed out by our government for a lot of money. Like, I took money from the banks. My victims weren't people, and it's a weird situation where I should have felt like, I don't know. I didn't really feel the need to apologize to the banks because they're still to this day stealing from poor people. Like, the banks make a lot of their money off overdraft fees and things like that. So it's coming from the backs of the poor, and they should be apologizing to me, honestly, which sounds bad because I was convicted of a crime with them, taking a loss and things like that. But banks are not somebody I would ever apologize to. But I do, if there's anyone who would have never entered this walk of life without me introducing it to them, like they might have just, stayed a square, just going to work and taking care of their family and stuff, and I introduced them to hustling, those are people who I feel like I would owe an apology to, actually real human beings rather than a system, right?
So I work here, and my question is more about like environment on a campus. So what do you think educators could do to make people who have come out of prison feel more comfortable in the classroom or on campus? Is there like something that we can put out there to say you're welcome here? If it's just like offering extra resources or.
So a lot of the formerly incarcerated students are not gonna ever talk about it or mention it, so you probably won't have any idea who they are in certain cases, but some of them will. And when they do let you know that that's their history, just letting them know that you're a resource for them, that you're not someone, like you telling me this did not make me fear you and wanna keep you distant. It's more, how can I support you and help you get through? Just coming to them, asking them those questions. But the way you can really support the ones who might not come out and say it, it's just in the language that you use. Like some people love to use the word like felon or convict, or like I've been sitting in classes where like we'll be talking about the criminal justice system. People don't even realize I have a criminal history, and they're like basically telling me I'm the scum of the earth, right? So just the way that you talk, your values, like do you believe in second chances? Do you believe in redemption? I feel like if those are your values, the way you carry yourself, you're just naturally gonna support those people. But there's not, the main thing for me, like not everyone feels this, I'm just one individual, right? But for me, the main thing I want is just to be like everybody else. And if I'm singled out, then am I really like everybody else, right? Like if the fact that I'm formerly incarcerated is becoming highlighted and things like that, then I'm probably not just a normal student in the class anymore, right? So I would say just support through the things that I just mentioned. And on campus, sometimes there's like different student groups and things like that. If you can show support to those students, I don't know if there's a justice-involved student group here, but if one starts up, maybe you can be one of their faculty sponsors or something like that, or support their events. Send your students to their events. When there's speakers coming who are formerly incarcerated, make sure that you show support to them. But for the most part, I would say that there's gonna be a lot of students who come through here that you had no clue that this was their history. And yeah. I'm part of a national network called the Formerly Incarcerated College Graduates Network. Like when I came through Pierce, went to UW, graduated with my master's, I didn't know if I was the only one in the world to get out of prison and earn a master's degree, but there's thousands of us, thousands and thousands and thousands nationwide. Some of us are getting associate's degrees, some of us getting bachelor's degrees, masters, there's a lot of them earning PhDs and law degrees. Like I have friends personally who are attorneys who have been to prison, some for violent crimes. I I have friends personally who have been to prison and they're college professors, like at the University of Washington, at Howard University, at Georgetown University. I have friends who are executive directors of organizations. So just recognizing that while their background does limit them in some ways, it can also be an asset and help propel them further than they ever imagined.
Sorry to ask so many questions, but
Oh, it's fine.
we even did the study and I was more passionate about it, or like not passionate about it, but it was more directed towards my personal feelings about youth incarceration, and especially anybody nearly under the age of 25, that there should be some shift in that following incarceration, because youth are more prone to incarceration or crime because of development of the development of like just your brain at before the age of 24. And has there been any further talk or hope for maybe that shift to happen?
Yes.
For
There's actually been a law that passed that says if you were convicted as a crime as a juvenile and you end up going to the youth prison, they are going to keep you there until your 25th birthday now, when it used to be 21. So,
so it got
directly
worse.
related
Yeah.
to the brain development, the fact that until you're 25, your brain is not fully developed. They're fully aware of that. It's a major shift though. I was actually part of they call it a multidisciplinary team. We had to go to every prison in the state and talk to young people who were now serving time in adult prison but eligible to come back to youth prison because of that law changing.
So if you're before the age of 25, you could go back.
If you were sentenced as a juvenile.
If
So
you're-
there's some people who were sentenced as a juvenile and they were in a youth prison. Some of them got kicked out, or some of them aged out of the youth prison and ended up in adult prison.
Yes.
So this law made it where a lot of these guys are now eligible to come back. Unfortunately, the youth prisons don't have their stuff in order, and we ended up talking to a lot of people, getting their hopes up, who are not gonna have the opportunity to come back. I mean, I'm still doing some work around that right now, just letting them know my thoughts and perspectives. I felt like the whole process, the questions that we were asking was irrelevant. Like, why should we go ask them, what are your successes while you're here at the Department of Corrections, when you're in Walla Walla maximum security prison with no programming, stuck in a room, you're 19 years old and a 40-year-old cellmate sending you on missions. You know?
Or
Like,
people that are for execution too. Walla Walla is the one
well,
that.
we're not executing anyone here anymore,
Oh yeah, but
Yeah.
just at that time, that's recently when I'm.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're sending them to these negative environments and expecting growth to take place. Like, we're asking questions about growth when there's nothing to foster that growth. So there were some issues with that process, but going forward, like, a young person is going to be able to stay in youth prison until 25 years old. Some of them will end up in adult prison after that though. Like, if you have a 20-year sentence, you know, you're going to end up in adult prison after that time is up, but at least you've had more time to mature and develop. And, you know, some of these guys, like, seem traumatized with the experience of being sent from the youth prison to the adult prison. Like, can't make eye contact, like looking down, and like, there's a lot that can go into that, but it's not a good place for young people at all. And people, they're aware of it. There's laws that's passed, there's legislators and everything who are fully behind treating youth as youth and separating that from the